Joining us now is former Defence Minister Sir Gerald Howarth and Colonel Simon Diggins, Defence and Security Analyst. Let's go to you first, Gerald, if we may. I think you, me, Alex, and indeed Grant Shapps are on the same page with this. We're all for diversity in our armed forces. Marvellous. But if we're proposing to let people in for diversity targets by relaxing security checks just so we can get ethnic minorities and foreigners into the armed forces, that strikes me as utter madness that will compromise the safety of this nation. This is wokery over common sense, isn't it?
Well, good afternoon there, and wonderful to hear such sound opinions. Absolutely right. This is complete and utter absurdity. As the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, himself a former soldier, quite rightly said, it is the armed forces have one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to defend the United Kingdom and bring death to the King's enemies. That is what it's all about. And this obsession with wokery is really damaging. It's damaging to military effectiveness. It's damaging to morale in the armed forces. It's a complete obsession, and it has got to stop. I texted the Secretary of State yesterday morning, having read the story in the Telegraph, and said, what on earth is going on? And he came straight back to me and said he intended taking the strongest action. So in response to John, who said nothing will happen, I think you can be sure that Grant Shapps will be taking action, because this has got to be rooted out. It isn't just a question of having lower standards of vetting for those who come from overseas or of ethnic minorities. It is the wokery that's permeating it. I'm just going to show you. This is the most recent issue of Royal Air Force News, which I have. Caroline's Pride. Huge article about that. Why do we need to know about some transgender navigator? We're interested not in a transgender navigator. We're interested in people having an effective armed forces, having good equipment, having strong and reliable, honest, noble people to do the job of defending the United Kingdom. That is what it's about.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Now, Colonel Simon Diggins, great to have you back on the show. It strikes me that, you know, coming out with, first of all, strategy on a piece of paper called our race policy or whatever it's called, and that being in the public domain, and say we're going to cut security checks for recruits who come from other countries. It's pretty much red flag to a bull when you think we're in the age of espionage, and I'm pretty sure regimes in Tehran and Russia and Beijing might be thinking, ooh, there's an idea. We could send people in to be our eyes and ears in the British Army.
Yeah, I have to say, when I heard all this, I'm afraid I laughed. And the reason I laughed is actually because Grant Shapps talked about, oh, there seems to be a political agenda. My first question was, well, actually, who's been in charge for the last 14 years? Oh, it's the Tories and the Liberal Democrats. So, you know, in terms of political agenda for change then, what's been going on for the last 14 years? Of course, you must have security checks to get people in. But we must also ensure, and this is where I think this whole thing is just a pure distraction, we need to try and ensure we are properly recruited and the good people we've got here stay. And that's much, much more important than distractions. We've had 3 distractions now from Grant Shapps. The first before Christmas was about beards. We then had something about tattoos, and now we've got wokery. In the meantime, we've now got an armed forces which is hemorrhaging so fast that never mind the government's target of being an army of 72,000 by 2025, we're going to be at 70,000 by 2025, simply because more people are leaving than are staying. Those are the real issues. Why are people leaving, and why are we not recruiting? All this stuff, whether it be beards, tattoos, or wokery, is a distraction from the main issue, and that's a serious bit of it. But the rest of it, frankly, is just smoke and mirrors. I know we can have a great conversation about wokery. I hate it as much as everybody else does.
Yeah,
but let's get to the real point.
Apparently, the place where we're really rubbish about picking up recruits is the 18 to 25-year-olds, exactly the sort of people who would be the new joiners, exactly the sort of people who, it strikes me, rather tool around on bicycles wearing balaclavas and carrying weapons when they could be paid pretty much to do the same. Do we need to think about how we're accessing, especially the sort of completely sort of demoralised, cut off, and in many respects, diverse communities in this country who would rather deal drugs than perhaps go and do some military service?
Well, I'm not going to, forgive me, I'm not going to characterise particular groups as being more interested in dealing drugs than joining the armed forces. I can't follow you there. But your basic point about ensuring that actually join the armed forces as soon as a worthwhile career is absolutely correct. And the issues around that are things like decent accommodation, decent pay, and decent prospects. In other words, the armed forces are properly equipped and resourced to do their job. And I think if you do that, then some of these issues will disappear. The really worrying thing, Alex, is actually the fact that we've got more people leaving than are joining. And the real question is, why is that happening? Why do people not feel there needs to trained personnel across our armed forces who feel so disillusioned they'd rather leave, and our recruiting, which can keep on improving, cannot keep up with those who are leaving. And those are much more serious structural issues than these kind of distraction issues that's being thrown up by Grant Shapps.
Let's go back to you, Gerald. I mean, I'm a massive admirer of Simon. I don't entirely agree with him on this. I do think wokery has reared its ugly head far too prominently. I'm with you, I always agree with you, Simon, but I'm not entirely on the same page here.
Gerald got it completely wrong last year.
Gerald, let me ask you, again, to be contrary, if you like. I totally agree with you about this mad wokery. This should not be involved in a discussion about our military. But the Tories have been in charge for 13 years. How has this wokery in all forms of life risen up so strongly to take control, if you like, of our cultural affairs? For example, talking of defence, in the Ministry of Defence, there are 93 diversity officers. 93, all of them on about 60 grand a year. How did the Tories allow this to happen?
That's a very good question, Kevin, and I don't know the answer to that, but we do need to know the answer to that. And I do disagree with Colonel Simon. I don't think this is a distraction. I think this is a very important issue because I think it goes to the heart of the esprit de corps of the armed forces, particularly the British Army. And that is something that these senior retired officers, including three commanders from the Falklands campaign, highlighted in the open letter they sent to the Secretary of State. But Colonel Simon is also right that if we're going to recruit, we need to make it attractive. And therefore, I think we have to pay recruits a decent wage. Many of them come from difficult backgrounds. Many of them come less well qualified, particularly in the army, than one would like. And the army can provide careers for these people so that when they leave, they have a really great prospect of good employment when they leave the army. But to retain people, you've got to pay them. You've also got to make sure they have downtime, so they have an exciting time. And Simon, I'll just say this to you. You know perfectly well that the fact is that when there is not a war on, it is more difficult for the army to recruit, particularly when you have a time of high employment as we have at the moment. So there are challenging issues already, but I think making it more attractive for people to join is necessary. Talking of accommodation, there has been a massive improvement in army accommodation in recent years. I saw Aldershot absolutely transformed during the time I was the Member of Parliament there, partly because of a massive PFI about which the country knows nothing. It is one of the most successful PFIs, £19 billion, and it's transformed the military estate in Aldershot. And that's what we need to attract people to do so, make the conditions good.
I think that makes sense. Let's go back to you, Simon. What about this? OK, we don't entirely agree on the wokery issue. I don't think it is a distraction. However, how about this, right? So we want to recruit numerically. We need more ethnic people. We need more foreigners. Why does that necessarily involve a diminution of security checks? Why can't we just properly security check all of these ethnic minority people and foreigners and carry on regardless? Why do we have to reduce security?
And that's a really great question. And genuinely, I don't know the answer to that because, I mean, of course, we want to have good security. I rather suspect behind it is probably a different set of civil service processes around the way in which these things are done and the difficulties about things like, for example, what they call security vetting and how complicated that actually is. And it may well be that, and there's a simple cost thing there, that I know that when you're looking at the more complicated versions of security vetting, what they call developed vetting, that's an extremely expensive activity. And it may well be, if you're looking for jobs to go into, you want potential officers, and they talk very specifically about recruiting people into intelligence, the sheer cost of conducting those checks may well be deterring people from coming forward. So there may well be, as I said, and I don't know the full detail on this one, I rather suspect there's maybe something not quite, if you like, at this kind of, I won't call it emotional cultural battle that we're involved in. And actually, Sir Gerald, I'm probably more on your side on this than perhaps I'm coming across now. But I do wonder whether there's a kind of Home Office oblique developed vetting process that's actually slowing things down is not necessary to that. And so I think what we need to try and do is, if you like, take some of the heat out of this and just look at that and see whether that's the issue there, because I think we're all in agreement. We need a fully recruited and well-resourced armed forces to defend our country, and that's absolutely what we need to try and do.
Yeah, Gerald,
Kevin.
I was going to say, Jeff, why do you think it is, that the armed forces are struggling to recruit? I was at the Army Museum last week, actually, and after wandering around that, I was prepared to sign up in the TA myself. I felt inspired. And it strikes me that a lot of these young people kind of want to belong to something. They want to belong to a gang. They want to join a march. They want to be part of something. A lot of them seem to have a lot of pent-up energy. They're not burning off properly, and I think a lot of them could be well suited to a career in the armed forces. So where's the disconnect?
Well, it is a problem. You're absolutely right, and there is an attraction to joining the armed forces, particularly people who perhaps lack the discipline of a normal home. The truth is that the army does recruit from some difficult areas of the country, and it transforms the lives of these people. It gives them a framework to their life. It gives them education. It gives them training. It gives them purpose, and they leave the armed forces much better citizens as a result. But I think going back to this business of targets, it is a complete and utter absurdity to have targets. Why do we have to have targets? Why do we have to have so many ethnic minorities? Why not have so many bigamists? Why not have so many wife swappers in the military? It is completely ridiculous having this target. The military, going back to what Tom Tugendhat said, has only one purpose: to defend all of us and our freedoms and to kill the king's enemies. That is the purpose of the armed forces. And when some people in the military say that, oh, we've got to reflect the society that we serve, I say that is complete and utter rubbish. If the military are engaged in the business of reflecting the society they serve, they will lose some of that nobility, some of that warrior capability that is not universally to be found outside the military. The military are special. They're special because they guarantee our freedom. They guarantee the freedom of our friends and allies around the world, and they contribute to keeping the peace in the world. That is why they're special. They need to remain special. These targets should be abandoned by Grant Shapps. We should stop recruiting from overseas and make it attractive for our own people to join our great three service: the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy with the Royal Marines, and the British Army. A great career, great opportunities, time to serve your country, do something good, come out with good training, job prospects as you leave. That's what they should be joining the military for, and that's what we should be doing. And forget this wokery. Let's just go on and recruit our own people whose loyalty will therefore not be in question.
Absolutely. Let's go back to you, Simon. Gerald, by the way, I think that I was wondering whatever happened to those television adverts we used to get all the time about people signing up, join the army, join the navy. I think now we need a new campaign with Sir Gerald Howarth at the forefront, telling the nation to sign up with that inspiring speech there. And, I'm with him all the way. He mentioned earlier, Simon, we need to make the armed forces more attractive in terms of pay, perhaps accommodation. Build on that theme. What would turn things around in terms of the fact that not enough kids are signing up? What would attract them?
Well, one thing that Sir Gerald said earlier on is absolutely correct, which is that, ironically, in a period of high demand, and you look at the period from sort of 2000 through to 2014, when we were conducting 2 operations simultaneously in Iraq, we had no problem either retaining people or people leaving. I think one of the challenges we've got at the moment is the armed forces, and they are really bright, intelligent, great people. They kind of know what they need to do, but they look around at what they've got in terms of kit, equipment, in terms of the resources they've got, and there are big gaps, capability gaps across the board. And they're being asked to do more than they know they reasonably do. We've heard very similar comments on that line from people like the Chief of the General Staff and others, recognising where we were. We just had the embarrassment of our fleet aircraft carriers not being able to deploy on a training exercise, and we can't get one down into the Red Sea to support the American effort down there because we haven't got the personnel to man the Royal Fleet auxiliary vessels with it. Now, those things are important, and it's not just about defence capability as a sort of concept, but I think in terms of being members of the armed forces, if you don't believe you've got what you need to do the job, your morale, your sense of purpose, that very clear purpose, and I agree entirely with what Sir Gerald said about, what is the purpose of the armed forces in terms of defending our freedom, a very, very, very clear and very noble speech, exactly as you said. But I think if those issues are not resolved as well, then you're never really going to get to the point where people actually say, I'm going to commit. Because you're asking people to commit themselves, and it's a commitment of life. It's a life commitment, your life on the line. And if you're asking people to put their life on the line, they need to know that they are properly equipped, properly resourced, and respected by the country as a whole. And I think those bits are missing. It's a very big argument about how much we spend on defence, but it's an important one. And it's not just about, again, defence as a concept. We need it in order to deal with people like Putin. It's actually so that people inside the armed forces feel they've got the resources and the capabilities they require in order to do the job. And I sense at the moment that's bits missing.